Hi there. I'm Claudia Hosky from Fed Insider, and on behalf of the GW University College of Professional Studies, TD Synnex, and Quest Public Sector, I'm pleased to welcome you to today's webinar on improving management of complex cloud environments. Please type your questions and comments into the Q&A pod on the left side of the screen. If we don't get to your questions today, we'll share them with our speakers so they can follow up with you. Also, take note of the Resources tab on the left side of your screen to download today's slides and other reading materials about the topic. We offer live captioning for all of our webinars. To follow along with us, use the hyperlink under the Live Captioning or CART tab located above the slides. We'll have the full transcript available in the next day or two. And to earn training credit for today's webinar, you'll have to answer all polling questions and stay online for the duration of the conversation. And now, let me turn over the reins to our moderator, John Breeden from Fed Insider. Take it away, John.
Thank you so much, Claudia, and hello, everybody, and thank you for joining us today. I'm John Breeden, and I will be moderating what I know is going to be a very lively and interesting discussion about both the advantages of hybrid and complex cloud use within government, and also some of the challenges that come with the management of those increasingly complex environments. Now, the use of cloud in government is rightfully skyrocketing as a way to improve efficiency and costs, as also a way to make sure that every program and mission has all the resources that it needs to be successful. But that can lead to complexity, challenges with data governance, and also very complex compliance issues. It's a highly technical topic, but we have four amazingly talented guests from both industry and government with us today to talk about their strategies for managing, auditing, and optimizing these newly complex environments. I'm super excited to get the show started. I'm sure all of you are as well. So let's meet our panelists today, and then we can begin. First off, I wanted to welcome Dr. Greg Skip Bailey, the Deputy CIO and the Assistant Director for IT with the U.S. Census Bureau. Dr. Bailey, it's an honor to have you joining us today. Welcome.
Thank you, John. It's good to be here.
Excellent. We also have Mark Cantor, the CISO for the Government Accountability Office. Mark, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with our audience today about this really critically important topic. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Great. And we're also joined today by Kristen Ruiz, the Deputy Assistant Administrator and the Deputy CIO for the TSA. Kristen, we're really honored to have you join us today for this really critical discussion. Welcome to the show.
Thanks so much. I'm glad to be here.
We are also fortunate to have another well-known expert with us today. Chris Roberts is the Director of Federal Sales Engineering with Quest Software Public Sector. Chris, I know how busy you are, so thank you for taking the time to speak with us today. Welcome to the show.
My pleasure. Never too busy to do this.
Awesome. Well, we're glad you're all here with us today. Now, we have a lot of really interesting items on the agenda to talk about regarding the management of complex clouds and computing environments. But our guests also have such diverse and impressive backgrounds. I thought we should take a moment to learn a little bit about the remarkable experts that we are fortunate enough to be spending the next hour with. So, Dr. Bailey, thank you again for joining us today. Now, you are the Deputy CIO with the Census Bureau. And while most people get to interact with your agency every 10 years or so, you do a lot more than what you accomplish just during census time. Can you tell us a little bit about some of the programs that the Census Bureau works on, and also your role and responsibilities with the Bureau?
Well, thank you, John, for the introduction. The Census Bureau is well known for the decennial census, which occurs every 10 years on the decade. Probably less known, we do over 130 censuses and surveys that include things like that you would be familiar with but didn't know, some of the leading economic indicators that come out on a weekly basis. And we do business surveys, and we do other surveys. We also do surveys for other federal agencies and that they use directly themselves. So we have surveys as often as once a week that we're doing, and some that are once a month, some that are yearly or every 5 years, and of course the 10-year one. So we're in constant motion in terms of the different surveys that we're conducting. We are we're first and foremost a data organization, and as you might guess. So for us, It's all about the data and how we manage it and take care of it. My role is we have a central IT organization, but we also have kind of a federated IT function throughout the census. And so my role is directly over the way the operations works and how we function day to day, but also to integrate with other functions within the Census Bureau that are doing, we have a lot of PhD math stats and other people that are constantly doing IT kinds of things. And so we try to keep track of it all and have it blend together.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Bailey. Really appreciate you being here. I have a lot of great questions for you. And Mark, you are the CISO for the Government Accountability Office, or GAO, as we'll refer to it mostly during the show today. And you have a really interesting role there because you work internally with the GAO's computer and cloud assets, but also keep a hand on the auditing side of things, which is part of the GAO's mission. Can you tell us a little bit about that and also your history of government service?
Sure, yes, it is certainly an interesting blend between the both operational world and then what we see throughout the government, various entities around the executive side of the federal government. But briefly, my background consists of about 30 plus years working in cybersecurity. I stood up one of the first SOCs at another government agency, and then spent about the next 20 years auditing the various federal government systems, concentrating in many different areas, not just what we traditionally think of cybersecurity in the cloud environment, but also IoT, OT, and then also with any sort of application partners that those entities are using. But it does provide a unique perspective in how we look at things, in just understanding, what other applications are out there, not just what we use internally, but also, looking at the best of breeds and sometimes how we can all enhance our cybersecurity posture.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Mark. Appreciate you being here. And Kristen, it's always great to have someone from the TSA on these shows. And you are the Deputy Assistant Administrator and the Deputy CIO for the TSA. So right there, working with some interesting technology every day, I'm sure. Can you tell us a little bit about your history in technology and government service and some of your core responsibilities today with the TSA?
Absolutely. Thanks so much for the question. Well, I started my career as a United States Marine, and when I was transitioning out to the civilian world, one of my first projects that I got to work on as a government contractor at the time was supporting the Microsystems Technology Office at DARPA. I got to work with some of the smartest PhDs across the country, and it really had a profound impact on my career over the last years. And later in 2016, I was able to switch over and become a civil servant. And my first assignment as a civil servant was at USDA Food and Nutrition Services, where I was leading the IT portfolio management division, where our main focus was on application development, governance, and architecture. And then in 2021, I became the first associate CIO at the Department of Transportation, focused on applications and digital solutions. And that was an exciting opportunity where I got to lead the development of app dev strategies and DevSecOps across the department and its sub-agencies. And when I saw the opportunity to join TSA, it seemed like a perfect fit for me. I am a 9/11 first responder and a lifelong technology enthusiast. So I was really excited to join this team. And I'm sure you've heard in the news, but TSA is responsible for so much across the country. I'm personally responsible for the support of the checkpoints in 450 airports, and I support 63,000 employee workforce and $2.2 billion in IT spend annually. So we do not take our responsibilities lightly, and our real core focus is to make sure that our mission is critical in providing a safe and seamless customer experience for our travelers.
Excellent. Well, thank you. What an impressive career, and thank you for your service. I appreciate that. So, Chris, we're also glad to have you here today. I know you're a real expert in this area, very, very well known in it. And you are the Director of Federal Sales Engineering with Quest Software Public Sector. Can you tell us a little bit about your history and also some of the programs that you're most proud of to have been able to work on with your public sector customers?
Sure. Just like every other panelist here, I started with a lifelong love of technology at an early age. it was first sci-fi, and then I discovered, hey, computers are a real thing. And I had to figure out what these things were. So I learned to code early on. I studied coding in college, studied computer science. But when I got out, I learned that the academic world and the world I was playing with were very different. And I learned that companies like Coca-Cola, where I worked, where we wrote logistics systems to track, where was the soda, what bottling plant, things like that, were very interesting. And before we had handheld devices, we were using handheld devices back then. So they didn't have touch screens or anything like that. But we learned early on what disconnected environments were like, how hard it was to code those things, how edge services would work. So all the irony, the things that we now take for granted with cloud were hard coded and laboriously put together in the ancient systems, like I call them, or at the code, we called it classic. So classic IT. But later on, I learned when I worked for places like Microsoft what systems architecture was and enterprise architecture, and actually building complex systems and what that took to get accomplished. And watched as they built, directory services and how we ingrained security. And we talk about zero trust, and well, back then it was least privilege. And there's so many things now that we just take as common in the IT infrastructure. But in earlier days, they just had different nomenclature and different naming for those. So what we call cloud today, we just call shared computing in another era. So I look at this right now, and while we may look at ourselves as experts, I just tend to think that if you can manage a computer, whether it's in the cloud or on-prem, as long as you understand that architecture and that technology and security and how to wrap those things for users and make them safe to use, then you're an expert. So in that case, I'll take the moniker.
Excellent. Well said, Chris. Thank you. Thank you all for introducing yourselves to our audience and for sharing your fascinating histories. It's clear that we're talking with the right people today. Now, this is a fairly complex and technical topic that we're discussing today, so I would like to begin by level setting things for our audience and letting them know how our guests are using their fairly complex infrastructures and also some of the challenges that they're overcoming. I think then once everybody's on the same page about the topic and the challenges, we can move into some of the solutions and also helpful advice for our audience today. And speaking of our audience, I would like to invite all of you to please submit any questions you might have for our panel. We're going to try to get to some of them live on the show today, but if there's not enough time, we will definitely round them all up and send them to our speakers after the show. So in either case, please, some of you are already getting some questions sent in, so thank you for that. Keep those questions streaming in. You really don't want to miss the chance to get some really good questions in front of this amazing group of people. So, okay, let's begin with kind of level setting things. And Dr. Bailey, I'd like to start with you if that is okay, because back in 2002, you and I did another show on cloud computing where you were a panelist, and you were at the time with the Census Bureau just starting to embrace cloud with some programs like, I believe you were doing like directory services and things like that. To level set things for our audience today, how have things changed over the last couple of years for the Census Bureau in terms of your cloud journey?
Well, we continue to embrace cloud more and more, and as we move forward, and even today, cloud is a central part of what we're doing. We're putting together a data lake to manage the data that we use from our various surveys. And so the key to this whole idea is that we're transforming as an agency from being a survey agency to being a data agency. And that fundamentally means that we focus on data as opposed to individual surveys. So having this data lake in the cloud allows us to use information. And in many cases, we can answer questions that people have without doing an additional survey, or else at least cutting the survey down, because we already know the answers to some of these. Where in the past, we were very siloed from one survey to the next. We're now beginning much more integrated, and the cloud's become a perfect environment for that transformation to take place. And so we're getting more and more of our surveys. So there's two sides of it. We're getting more and more of our surveys in the cloud so that we do more and more online and more direct with the people of the United States. And we're also more and more engaged in managing and working with the data in the cloud as the information comes back and we're able to use it. So we've definitely taken a much bigger step in it. And that's there's some pain along with that. Part of it, there is a skill gap. The skill set we had well developed for on-prem does not directly translate. It's certainly a good background for work in the cloud, but we're needing to develop skills and find skills that are very specific to cloud. And that's been a real challenge for us.
Yeah, no, thank you, Skip. I was actually going to ask you about some of those early challenges that you're overcoming. It sounds like a skills gap was kind of the first one that you ran into. Doing things in the cloud is a little bit different than doing things on-prem, I guess.
Yes. Yeah, it's definitely different. I mean, there are some fundamentals that are always the same, and what you do in the cloud is fundamentally the same, but how you do it is very different. And we went through a big transition from trying to do everything. Although we are moving to be more and more open source in terms of our big tools, we're also learning that doing more and more that's cloud native is much more efficient than just trying to. We originally had the idea we want to be totally open source and not dependent on the cloud so that we could migrate from cloud to cloud and wouldn't matter. And we find that's not a practical solution, that we really need to leverage the cloud, whatever cloud we're using, and what's native to that cloud, and what tools and functions that it makes available without us having to maintain that independently. So we're kind of crossing both worlds in terms of tools that maybe our statisticians use, tools that we use. We're trying to go more and more open source, but we're also moving in the direction of doing a lot of work that's cloud native.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. I appreciate that. So, Chris, it's really interesting hearing from Dr. Bailey. I'm sure you hear a lot of stories along those same lines when working with your public sector customers. In terms of the various challenges of cloud complexity for our audience today, what are some of the top concerns that you're hearing about, and what are the ones that you kind of run into when you're working with government agencies?
Sure. I think the first thing that we take for granted when it comes to cloud is that vendors have done a great job. When I say vendors, I'm talking about the Microsofts, Amazon, Googles of the world, that convincing us that cloud is the easiest thing for your organization to do. Just get to the cloud and everything will be great. It'll be unicorns and rainbows. And I'm here to tell you, as Skip just pointed out, that the skills gap is a very real thing. So most of our skills are based on on-prem tools like software legacy assets, whether it's an operating system, developer tool, application interfaces, security, switches, firewalls, et cetera. All of those are on-prem tech tools and techniques we've been growing up and become accustomed to. Cloud is very different. Cloud is everything software as a service. So everything is configured through consoles. And if you ever sat down with anyone working on Amazon or Azure, they're not looking at your typical software panel. They're looking at a console that was created by the vendor. So in Azure, there could be dozens, if not hundreds of consoles to configure the environment. Same thing for AWS as well as for Google. I think we've heard too many stories of misconfigured data leaks. So I think I wouldn't mention anybody in that from the press, but there have been a lot of data leaks because of misconfigured storage devices, buckets, or ports on a cloud environment. So I'd say the complexity on the cloud is contributing to the misconfiguration. And that comes back to, I think they just did a poll in a panel here that 33% of the people are concerned about security and risk management when it comes to the cloud. So just putting something in the cloud doesn't mean it's secure and safe. It means that there's a lot of still work to do. And I just remember that customers need to be aware, or government, especially federal agencies, need to be aware that software as a service is typically easiest to consume because that's just, it's provided for you as a managed service. Platform as a service, where I'm using it to create and build and roll out my applications, is a little more complicated. The most complicated, I would say, is infrastructure as a service, because that means that I'm configuring all my cloud VMs, my workspaces, my buckets, and all my front-end tools and edge tools. I'm responsible for configuring those objects and setting permissions on those particular objects. So the complexity has to do with the fact that it's a new environment. It is also a very vast environment, but I think the more training we get, as Skip pointed out, and close that skills gap, a lot of the risk and complexity will get eased out of the infrastructure over time.
Yeah, no, that makes sense, Chris. And you mentioned when you were just talking about the different vendors that do cloud, Amazon, Google, and AWS, of course. What about the complexity in terms of that multi-vendor environment? I mean, what kind of issues do agencies run into when moving data or working with apps that maybe straddle both, say, Amazon and Google clouds? I mean, is that another layer of complexity?
That is a layer of complexity. So the integration question comes back to what is your application and services built upon? So if you are built on a proprietary system, if you are using specific API sets that are configured just for Azure, for instance, or just for AWS, there is a complexity there. So if you want to interoperate between different clouds, you have to find a common denominator. So in the old days, if you wanted to move software between two different platforms, you had to have a file transfer service to be very rudimentary. When it comes to clouds, it's not just transferring a file or a service. You've got to transfer permissions, you got to transfer the right objects, and then you got to figure out, well, which APIs do I use if I have portions of my data on AWS, portions of my data or front end on Azure or Google or somewhere else? How do I create that interoperability? So the complexity is not just the configuration and operation of the environment, it's also interoperating those environments as well. So I think a lot of customers now are finding out that the easy lift was putting productivity applications in the cloud, whether it's Google Workspace or Office 365. I now have purpose-built applications on-prem. How do I now migrate those to the cloud? How do I refactor, re-architect those applications? And then how do I move the data there and secure that data too as well? So those problems aren't going to go away. As I said, cloud is just somebody else's server in another zip code. You still have to do the care and feeding for those platforms, and that will always be a little bit complex.
Yeah, no, definitely. Thank you, Chris. That's a lot to think about in this level setting section. Kristen, I wanted to thank you again for being here. And some of the things that Chris brought up actually I think is very relevant for you. I wanted to start off with kind of level setting this section for us and kind of asking you if you could explain to us how the TSA looks at cloud. I know that on previous shows, other similar agencies that, have a law enforcement type of role, they've decided to keep at least some of their data on-prem. And I was curious if you were doing the same thing as well at the TSA.
Great question. Just like other law enforcement agencies, TSA continues to face these unforeseen challenges due to the complexity of our mission operations and the existing infrastructure that we have. So currently, we operate in a hybrid environment with workloads and data across a multi-cloud and on-prem environments as well, as you alluded to. And, our cloud journey started in early 2018 when we formed the digital services team. And our DST developed the TSA cloud strategy, which ultimately resulted in TSA implementing several cloud platforms. Since then, we continue to make incremental advancements to our multi-cloud model. And we really focus on a holistic approach across our platform providers to achieve security, flexibility, and access to the best in breed capabilities that can be leveraged to meet our mission. It's been critical to understand the vastness of the assets and the data that we have across our enterprise before we can migrate them to the cloud. So because of that, it's been particularly important to identify the data sets with different data classifications and determine how to handle the public, sensitive, confidential, and classified data. So certainly we always look at cloud first as we're envisioning our future target architecture and path forward. But for now, we do have some systems that we keep the mission essential and classified data on-prem. Securing and safeguarding our mission essential systems and data across the enterprise has always been our top priority.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And as a law enforcement agency, you probably have another element. You mentioned this a little bit that adds to your complexity, and that's you talk about your data. Some of your data, you also have different security levels for it that maybe a civilian agency that wasn't in law enforcement might not have. Can you tell us a little bit about that and how that could make things just a bit more complex for cloud infrastructures and management tasks for agencies that are also dealing with multiple security levels for their data?
Yes, so the complexity of being a law enforcement agency makes the selection of the appropriate cloud paramount, especially with regards to the protection and safeguarding of our federal air marshals' identities. We are mandated to ensure that that information is safe and secure. So this adds to that complexity of selecting appropriate clouds and requiring sometimes additional steps to ensure data is sanitized whenever possible to remove identifiers in other cloud environments. From our zero trust perspective, we also review how data is aggregated and shared across our systems so that we can ensure appropriate protections and roles have been given access. So often this requires TSA to look at FedRAMP High solutions or augment moderate clouds with additional controls so that TSA can be responsible to implement those security controls. Through recent zero trust maturity evaluations, we have discovered our cloud hosted environments are performing at a higher security posture when compared to traditional on-prem systems. So this is largely attributed to the ease of implementing cloud native security controls, such as application level microsegmentation and geographically distributed data storage and recovery. So the best advice I can give for organizations in a similar data complex situation is to not cut corners. Develop an agency-wide approach to data governance and to take and implement that step by step.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. I have a lot of follow-up questions for you, Kristen. Thank you. So, Mark, thank you so much for joining us. It's always great to have guests from the GAO, especially ones like yourself who can talk about your own experiences in complex cloud environments and also some of the things that your auditors discover and advise different agencies with. To start with, what is the complexity of the GAO like itself, and what kinds of key challenges do you see agencies running into as they shift increasingly to the cloud?
Sure. Great question, because as we all know, GAO holds a lot of information as pertinent to our audits, and we have to retain a certain level of information as those audits go. The challenges that we run into is really just meeting the expectations, whether it be our own internal expectations or the entity's expectations that we're auditing for the security of that information. But I go back and really listen to our other panelists, certainly Chris and Skip, when they were talking about zero trust and the focus on how we're controlling the information in the cloud. Because when you go back to the on-prem environment, you really focus on the computers with a bunch of big blinking lights in a cold server room. You didn't have to worry about how those configurations are being managed as much as you do in the cloud when you really have that infrastructure layer now that's being managed across the board. And so really extending that zero trust focus, how are we separating out the various duties and responsibilities of whether people are accessing the data, whether it's a database administrator or a system operator, or even really extending to the new hardware level or the cloud infrastructure layer. How are we ensuring that all of those roles are appropriately separated so there's no conflicts as going on as potentially before? This really kind of gets back exactly to what we were talking about before on the zero trust, but these controls haven't necessarily changed. The complexity of where those controls are being applied has really changed. And then certainly extending this a lot further to how are we monitoring to really ensure that those controls are being effective through all of those different segments in a cloud environment. Clouds certainly produce a lot of data. They can report on many, many different areas, but how are we getting the correct information that, for example, a SOC needs to monitor? For another example, the computer operators need to monitor to ensure that things are functioning appropriately and whatnot.
Yeah, no, wow. Okay. Thank you, Mark. You've given us a lot to think about. I appreciate it. I have some follow-up questions for you on the auditing side in just a bit. But thank you so much, everybody, for level setting the situation about complex cloud computing environments and the key challenges that government agencies are facing and will likely face. Now let's talk a bit more about these challenges and also start to discuss some of my favorite thing, which is the solutions and the advice that our amazing panelists have for our audience today. Kristen, before the show, you and I were talking a little bit about cloud complexity, and you were telling me about a really innovative approach that the TSA was taking by creating a data mesh, which helps you deal with a lot of configuring different domains. Can you explain how that works for our audience, what advantages that brings to the TSA, and how other agencies listening in right now might be able to kind of lay that groundwork and use that same experience to do something similar within their own complex networks?
Absolutely. So first, as we approach the 23rd anniversary of 9/11 tomorrow, I just wanted to highlight that, TSA has a unique mission to protect the nation's transportation systems and ensure the freedom of movement, people, and commerce. So from an operational perspective, we have frontline operations with a mission focus in our checkpoint operations, law enforcement, and counterintelligence areas. But we also have the back-end support with services like our employee services and operation support, for example. This sets the foundation of the operational domain-driven model, which is grouped by mission-specific domains and functional lines of business within each subdomain. So sharing across the enterprise can be challenging, but by using the cloud to transform the domain data into purpose-built business outcomes, we focus on key components of domain ownership, central security policy and governance, and cross-domain integration, so that each domain has the flexibility to build data products and maintain control over the use of the enterprise data services. We have also put a focus on our data architecture, establishing the enterprise data platform and data mesh patterns. So in a nutshell, we're building a cloud-native platform that adheres to the best practices to enable TSA to meet our mission and fast access to all potentially relevant information, regardless of source, format, or location.
Wow, that sounds like it. That sounds like a really interesting program. Thank you for explaining that. Chris, I'd like to dive into this cloud complexity issue with you a little bit as well, since I know you're an expert in this area. Where should people begin when it comes to trying to unravel and monitor this increasing challenge of cloud complexity? I think the panelists did a wonderful job of sort of outlining what the problems are. Let's start at the beginning, maybe. What are some good techniques to begin to kind of unravel some of that complexity? And are there any tools that can be employed to help out?
Sure. I'm going to start with where Skip, Mark, and Kristen have already gone. That is, they talked about the importance of data in their organization. So we think computers are great devices, and we play games, we communicate, but at the end of it all, they really are there to provide effective data processing. That's an ancient word, but it's very critical. Data is the most critical component when it comes to any computing architecture. It's why these systems exist. So when you start to think about how do you understand the complexity, or how do you apply security, you have to start with data. That is, what is the right amount of data? Who should have access to it? Where should they have access to it from? Which applications are going to work with that type of data? What format it's going to be in? Does it need to be in the cloud, in hybrid, at the edge, on a mobile device? If you start to understand how you're currently using and consuming data, you start to understand exactly now, how do I architect a system, be it the delivery mechanism for that architecture, or the security apparatus that's going to protect that data within that architecture? I would actually start with, where's my data, who's using it, who needs to have access to it? Once I understand that, I can start doing a simple inventory. Okay, now, do I understand all the nodes where that data resides, whether it's a workstation, a mobile device, a server, tablet, cloud bucket, wherever it may be? Do I understand the node that has the data or holding that particular data? Now I need to understand exactly who's going to access it, or the user component to that aspect of that particular data access. And then the thing that we often forget is the APIs that we use to manipulate that data. A lot of developers, a lot of the mobile applications we're using right now, whether it's on our laptop and other devices, those applications were written by developers. Do we understand the APIs that we use, the API calls that are going from that device to the cloud or to my data and back and reverse? And do I understand exactly what types of security protocols have I applied? Which objects are being accessed, and who is being accessed? Is it privileged? Is it class? Is it unclassed? When I start to unravel the node information, the data information, the user information, and the API, those four key tenets, as I call them sometimes, if I understand those things, I start to understand exactly what is the best way to manage my data and control its manipulation and its security, and also how can I now to apply least privilege or zero trust principles to the management of that complex data environment.
Wow. Okay. Well, thank you, Chris. That's a lot to think of. I'm learning so much on the show today. I really appreciate you and all the other speakers. I'm sure our audience does as well. So, Mark, I promised you some follow-up questions and along the lines of your auditing side of things. So I'd like to do that now, because I think that's a fascinating area that a lot of people are interested in. Now, many organizations need to comply with federal standards or even best practices. What can agencies do to ensure improve compliance in those complex environments so that when a compliance team, either ATO or A123 or auditors, they come by, they can actually demonstrate that everything is both safe and secure within their agency and within their data?
No, that's a great question, and it's one that certainly on my prior auditing days we would run into on a consistent basis. But I will jump back to one thing and say that GAO does have the high risk list, and cybersecurity has been on the high risk since 1997. So as the technologies have changed, so has the risk, and so have the threat actors. Everyone is in that constant state of involvement. So the threat actors are learning what is new into these new technologies as we're certainly bridging and are in the cloud in most cases. So really getting back to the understanding of the cloud, from an integrator standpoint, do we even know what actually is being updated in the cloud? So, thinking about like the software bill of materials or the SBOMs, whether they be the main cloud service providers, they're constantly upgrading different features in one way or another. Do we understand how that affects our security posture and our risk into those applications? So getting back to kind of the more auditing side of this, really kind of the key things that we need to focus on is, does our documentation support our risk level? And then do we have a good understanding through demonstratable controls that we're actually implementing those security mechanisms effectively in the cloud? So how are we documenting those procedures so that when it either comes to the ATO process or A123 in the cases of other requirements, or the auditors come in, we have a real good understanding of what the controls are, what we've designed as far as management's construction, and then how is it being implemented so that we're consistently upgrading or consistently monitoring the effectiveness of the environment.
Yeah, no, excellent. Thank you. It's always great to hear your perspective on things, Mark. I really appreciate that. And Dr. Bailey, I wanted to ask you about ways that kind of unravel some of this complexity. And we got a really interesting audience question that was asking if you or any of your other federal agencies were thinking about using AI or machine learning and some of these advanced technologies, if that could be employed to kind of start to unravel some of this complexity. It sounds like it's really hard for a human to kind of keep track of everything that's going on. I was just wondering if you had considered that, and if that was one of the audience questions. So I wanted to see your thoughts on that.
Actually, we've used AI and machine learning for quite some time, and pretty much on-prem to this point. So the location doesn't matter so much, whether you're on-prem or in the cloud, but we've used it a lot on the backside of what we're doing. Generative AI, which is what's gotten everybody excited, we're looking at, and we're moving somewhat cautiously because of our need to really maintain the integrity of the data, and a lot of the Gen AI stuff leaks and we have problems. So we're certainly looking at it, especially in dealing with data that's all public access. We are bound by law, Title 13, Title 26, Title 5, to protect the data that we have from people getting access to it. And we go to a lot of trouble to make sure that's true, and we don't want to jeopardize that. So we're being cautious. But in terms of traditional AI and machine learning, yes, we're using it, have used it, and it's helping with sometimes somewhat mundane things, but nevertheless, it's still been very useful. And obviously that will move to the cloud as we do more and more of our analytical stuff in the cloud.
Yeah, no, thank you. I appreciate you answering the audience questions, and thank you to the audience. You're all are asking some really great questions, so please keep those coming in. Okay, let's talk some more about complexity, and especially let's turn to security in this next section, since that's something that is certainly on the forefront of every federal agency's minds and people that work there for sure. Mark, I wanted to start with you in this one because I think you get to think about this both in terms of your GAO network and also what you're seeing in terms of the audits that your agency is doing. When operating in these newly complex environments, what steps could you recommend in terms of enhancing security measures to safeguard sensitive agency information, even if that data is now being spread out across a much more complex environment?
Yeah, that's a great question because, as we all know, systems don't work independently of each other. Every system is usually requiring data from another system to really build whatever its function may be across either the enterprise or, throughout various government systems. There's many different layers that are involved, or even whether it be financial reporting, whether it be law enforcement, you name it. But to me, it's do we really understand all the elements that, from an application perspective, the data perspective, do we need to transfer all that information? So, for example, if a system only needs, let's say, 5 key elements, why are we sending 6? Why are we sending 20? Whatever those key elements may be to perform that function. Do we have a good understanding of that from either the receiving system or the sending system? So, I mean, it's really kind of bases itself on a partnership as we're securing the systems and protecting them from each other as well. So then the next step of this is, after we've got a good understanding, working with the information assurance teams on both sides, what happens if, unfortunately, data is lost or stolen? How do we plan to accommodate or take care of such related incidents? How do we minimize our risk? All these are really concerns that when we look at and either evaluate systems across the federal government or start looking at really how our own systems are working, really take those into key accounts of, are those pertinent pieces of information relevant for the various systems as they do their normal business activities?
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you. Appreciate that. Very reasonable response for sure. Now, Kristen, obviously, for an organization like the TSA, as you've mentioned, the safety of the passengers and the data that you collect is really going to be paramount, really almost superseding almost every other consideration, I'm sure. So my question for you is, in terms of multi-cloud use, what advantages can agencies get by using some of these multi-cloud environments, especially in terms of security, that kind of justifies, I mean, we're really pushing through all this complexity for a reason. Is there anything security-wise that kind of makes that worthwhile?
Yeah, I mean, TSA's use of the multi-cloud solutions include looking at reducing the risk of a single point of failure, vendor independence and flexibility, our ability to leverage robust data protections and disaster recovery. While this increases complexity at TSA, the solutions also enable us to provide services to support the traveling public that would not be possible without it. It also ensures that TSA is able to leverage providers that ensure the protection of our data and our travelers' data to the required levels. Our security technology and infrastructure in TSA, it does continue to rapidly change as the threat environment does on a daily basis. But in terms of security in our multi-cloud environment, zero trust, as everyone hears, is now a key design principle for IT systems and applications. We must assess and decide that the protection to implement what practices and processes will follow. So over the past 10 years, cloud service providers consistently offer native security tools and a comprehensive set of services. And we want to make sure that all of that's incorporated in our security layer defense so that it can put the protection into our infrastructure, applications, databases, and API interfaces. Specifically, we choose service implementation on a service-by-service basis to avoid a one-size-fits-all or custom lock-in solution. And truly, we believe that security compliance is a shared cloud responsibility between our cloud service providers and TSA. So we look at that model of the shared responsibility when we're deciding what things we need to put in place from a security standpoint and what things we'll inherit.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And from a sometimes traveler passenger point of view, I definitely appreciate all the effort that you do to keep me and my fellow passengers safe. So thank you for that. Now, Dr. Bailey, you mentioned in your introduction about all the things that the Census Bureau does, even when the main census is not taking place. I believe you mentioned you perform over like 130 surveys on various topics to help with government knowledge and planning. With all that you are doing, does that not necessitate the need or kind of force you into a multi-cloud environment? I mean, now that you're kind of operating in that, do you have any security tips for others who may be necessarily or maybe even being kind of forced in that direction?
Yeah, I would say the reality is that any organization of any size, they are doing multi-cloud, whether they realize it or not. And certainly in terms of if they're using SaaS or other things that that bring with it a cloud, they're in a multi-cloud environment. And so it's not sort of should we or should we not. It's kind of a reality. And I think the other sort of maybe fable that is passed around is that if you go into cloud, then you have less concern about security. And the reality is you do the same kinds of, you worry about security in the same kinds of way that you do on-prem, but it's a different environment. So the implementation is different. So you need to upgrade skills, but the same worries exist in the cloud that do in on-prem. They certainly most of the major vendors of cloud have very good data centers, and so if you maybe the one exception might be if you had a very substandard data center and then you moved into the cloud. But for the most part, you've got the same worries. It doesn't change. We just have to figure out how to do it differently in the cloud, and so learning those nuances, and it does vary from cloud vendor to cloud vendor. And so you kind of have to learn a lot of different ones, not just one. There's an experience, once you've learned one cloud, you've learned one cloud, and they are not the same. And so you've got to operate across all of these. So I think the best advice I would get is you just got to be vigilant, and you've got to employ the same zero trust kinds of plans in the cloud that you would do anywhere else, and recognize that you own it. The cloud provider does not own, anytime you've seen anybody that makes the paper because they had a breach, they were more than likely it was in the cloud, and those breaches occurred. They don't say, oh, I was breached because I was in the cloud. That's not why. It's because they didn't do what they needed to do to protect the data. And since we are a data-centric organization, that becomes very, very important.
Yeah, no, definitely makes sense. Thank you, Dr. Bailey. Appreciate that. Now, Chris, on many of the shows that we have done here at Fed Insider, the topic of zero trust comes up a lot. I mean, we've done specific shows on zero trust, but even on other shows, zero trust seems to get mentioned a lot, especially because it's another mandate that agencies are working towards. Can you maybe explain for our audience how zero trust can be achieved in this kind of complex multi-cloud environment where the landscape is really anything but a closed system? I mean, first off, is zero trust possible in this type of complexity, and how can that start to be achieved?
Sure. I think early on one of my other answers, I talked about the importance of the criticality of data in your organization. So once you understand your data, the next key pillars are your users. So who are your users? So most of our identity systems today are based on some centralized system of truth. That is, who are the users in the organization? For many federal agencies, that is still Active Directory, whether we like it or not. It is still there as the source of truth for both human resource systems, for application provisioning, or even for server administrating, determining who's going to administer a system. We pull that information from Active Directory. When we introduce cloud to the environment, we now have some decisions to make. Every cloud provider also provides an IDP, that is an identity provider service or an identity management system. Amazon has one. Microsoft definitely has one with Entra ID. So we have to decide what is going to be our source of truth from a user perspective. Once you've made that decision, and granted, you can have multiple, makes it more complex, but usually, and I do have agencies that are still hardened from the standpoint that we will have an on-prem directory, whatever it's going to be. And then from there, they will synchronize with different clouds, but their source of truth is something that they control within their environment. Other agencies are full on cloud. So they use a full identity system that could be part of Azure or Amazon. But regardless of where that source of truth resides, that zero trust set of principles now has to be applied for that source of truth. So for an end user, the applications, the data, even the nodes, or even where I can use a system or authenticate to a system, let's say if I left the continental United States, should I still have access to public data? All those truths, all those principles come back into play based on that source of truth. So now it becomes critically important that, one, do I trust my directory, whether it's Active Directory or some other platform? And that becomes sort of like the Achilles heel for a lot of these systems. A lot of the breaches, they will target your directory service. We've seen multiple targets or multiple attacks against Active Directory, against M365 in Azure to really get at those user assets. So that criticality of that level of information is important because zero trust starts with the identity of the person using the system, the identity of the person accessing data, the identity of a person using a node, and the identity of anyone with privileged access. So the last tier that is of concern to most of my agency customers is who are my privileged users and are they accessing privileged devices and or data? And that's a whole nother conversation around zero trust because privileged user, privileged sessions management is a critical component within zero trust as well. But you cannot escape the fact that you have to have a competent source of truth, whether it's on-prem in the cloud, and you have to learn to reconcile and integrate those two different platforms.
Wow. Okay. Excellent. Great advice. Thank you so much. I mean, this has been an amazing discussion from all our guests today. I almost can't believe that we're getting near the end of our time today with our amazing guests, but I'm going to give one more question into each of them before we have to say goodbye today. So, Chris, let me ask you for your final question today. I would like to tap into your expertise here one more time, which we very much appreciate, by the way, and ask you about a somewhat advanced concept in these kind of cloud deployments, but one that I think may hold a lot of promise, and that is the concept of automation and also artificial intelligence. Dr. Bailey mentioned that a little bit earlier. Have you seen any examples where things like that, like artificial intelligence, are already being used to help track and monitor some of this complexity that we've been talking about today? And how could a system like that work and integrate with agency networks?
Sure. That's a long answer. I'm going to try to make it real short and brief. So we talked about data. AI is based on data. So it's a mystery box, but it's really based on data. The question for us when it comes to really using it from an automation standpoint against, say, trying to understand an audit report or understand a set of logs, that now is based on data. So the critical question to ask yourself is one, and I think Skip hit on it, is that is using AI on-prem is inherently more secure than using a generative AI model from a OpenAI or Anthropic or anyone else. So you have to ask yourself, the question is, how will I automate? Will I automate using traditional tools from traditional vendors? I mean, us being one of them and others being, whether it's Amazon or Microsoft being others. And also, if I'm going to use generative AI, then how do I create a private firewall model that I can use and integrate my data with? That is a complex set of questions, and every vendor has a different answer for that. But if you can use an on-prem model, you're much better off. So you can use a Llama model to incorporate into your own platform. You can control that generative AI model a lot more efficiently from a security standpoint than if you use a public model from one of the larger vendors. It's not a simple solution. It's not an either or. It's a very complex equation to think about exactly how I would apply AI. But there are other traditional automation techniques, whether it's scripting, whether it's based on the current security apparatus that I have. You have to examine, do I use traditional automation or do I look at AI, and can I secure the use of AI in my environment to achieve those results?
Excellent. Well, thank you, Chris. I appreciate your very concise answer to an admittedly very complex question. Thank you for being with us today as well. And Dr. Bailey, it was great to have you here on another cloud show because we got to hear about the innovation and the evolution of the Census Bureau from those early stages of your cloud use that you were describing during our 2022 show compared with your kind of all-in approach today. Now, during the 2022 show, I don't know if you remember this, but I asked you if you had any advice for agencies who were also kind of starting their journey to cloud at that time. And of course, you had some great advice for them. Now, I'd like to ask you the same question, but if you have any helpful advice or maybe even warnings or things people should look out for other agencies who, like you, are now pushing well down the path into a multi-cloud environment.
Oh, I think first and foremost, you need to understand why you're going to the cloud and what's the motivation. If the motivation is to save money, it's probably not a good reason, because I think most people find they don't save anywhere near what they could. And if you don't change your business practices, it'll cost you more money. So I think you got to say, what is it for? And if it's for the agility and for the flexibility and the ability to do things you couldn't do otherwise, great reasons. The other thing I would say is that you got to think about how you want to do this. A lot of in the early days, people talked a lot about hybrid cloud, and like everything else in this business, there's about 20 different definitions of a hybrid cloud. But if you take the most sort of structured or original definition, it meant that a given application was running both on the cloud and on-prem. If you mean just as an organization, are you on-prem and on cloud, everybody's going to be a hybrid. But if you take this other definition, I would recommend that you look at that strongly and probably would advise against it. We started down that road, and it's a very difficult thing to do well. You're better off deciding what goes in the cloud, what stays on-prem. And that even goes to multi-cloud applications. You're better off, if you can avoid it, is to keep things unique to one cloud environment. You can be multi-cloud, but being multi-cloud on the same application, difficult, and you got to have really good reasons because you've just really amped up the complexity. So I think those are some things to think about as you go into it. Know why you're doing it. I would avoid a true hybrid cloud environment, and I would kind of try to, as you go into the multi-cloud environment, keep things unique to one cloud environment, separated by the tasks and operations or applications that you're doing per cloud environment. And I think you'll save yourself a lot of headaches if you do that. And then last but not least, you got to either train, develop, or find cloud talent. You can't just assume that people are going to know what to do in an effective way. And then I guess one more piece, use native cloud functions where you can. They can be a great benefit.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Dr. Bailey. Wonderful advice as always. Thank you so much. And Mark, thank you for being here. When someone from the GAO talks, people tend to listen. but seriously, it was great talking with you today about your cloud complexity, both internally to the GAO's environment and then also providing some high-level advice regarding what you're finding in your auditing practices. Now, we covered a lot of ground today in a fairly brief period of time. Is there any final advice or cloud complexity wisdom that you'd like to make sure our audience takes away from the show today?
Sure, and it's been a pleasure being here today. The two kind of final thoughts on this subject are know your data and how you're extending that data to ensure that the data classifications around that data so that you can ensure an effective implementation of that control environment. The second one I have to say is always, keep learning, right? Keep learning and stay vigilant. Cybersecurity is always changing. The old thought was shelf life of some sort of cybersecurity knowledge is 2.5 years. I would say it's much less than that now as the environment keeps changing. But yeah, certainly keep learning and stay vigilant.
Excellent. Thank you, Mark. Appreciate that. Great final piece of advice from you. I appreciate that. And Kristen, that means it looks like you get the final word on the panel today. It was really great hearing about your multi-cloud strategy and the high security that you're building into that, as well as some practical advice and things that you're doing. Really got a lot out of that. For agencies who may not be quite so far along as the TSA, but which may want to follow on your success, do you have any advice for them about how they can also get started and kind of see some of that success for themselves?
Yes, and thank you again for having me today. I really appreciate the opportunity. So in our cloud migration journey, instead of focusing on technology, we start with understanding business operations, their desired outcomes, and our specific use cases. As I mentioned early on in our operational domain-driven approach, we would draw a big picture of the enterprise target architecture, because once you get that, you can shift to the data-driven and user-centric solutions to improve mission operations efficiency and enhance our user experience by building in the technology components with automation and integration seamlessly. TSA is implementing a holistic approach to security, which considers people, processes, technology, and culture. All of this is really important to meet our administrators' vision of speed to impact. We are moving fast to get the safe and secure technology into the hands of our frontline workers. Certainly, IT has played a pivotal role in helping the agency scale to meet the increasing travel demands. You may have noticed that our 10 most busiest travel days of all time have all been in 2024. And actually, July 6th, we broke the 3 million passengers screened in one day mark. And the new emerging technology that the agency continues to invest in has been a key success factor.
Excellent. Well, thank you. I really appreciate you being here today and all the work that you're doing with the TSA as well. Thank you all so much for talking with me about this fascinating topic today. I learned so much today at a really high level, and I really appreciate it. I'm sure our audience did as well. So thank you so much to our superstar speakers today, Dr. Bailey, Mark, Kristen, and Chris, for joining us to talk about this critically important topic for our amazingly attentive audience. And thank you also to our amazing audience. I'm so glad that you were all here with us today. Please check out our schedule of future shows because we have a lot of great content coming up right around the corner. And of course, I hope to see you all there. So now let me turn things over to Fed Insider's Claudia Hosky for some final thoughts for our amazing audience today.
Thanks, John. And thanks again to all of our speakers for your insights today. And for our audience, thank you for your participation. Training certificates will be emailed after the webinar ends. And remember to log back in the next day or two if you want a copy of our captioning transcript. We have many webinars in the works, so be sure to visit fedinsider.com so you can see what's coming up and register for multiple webinars at the same time. And while you're there, you can check out our podcast, Feds at the Edge. And with that, this is Fed Insider signing off.